It was a quiet afternoon in the upscale neighborhood. The sun shone brightly, casting long shadows on the neatly manicured lawns and tree-lined streets. Birds chirped in the distance, and the scent of fresh flowers filled the air. This was a place where everything seemed perfect, where everyone had a place, and everything stayed in order. People walked their dogs, children played outside, and life moved at a peaceful pace. On this particular day, a young black boy, Jaden, was walking down the sidewalk. His hoodie was worn out, and his skateboard hung loosely from his arm. The streets were unfamiliar to him, but he was used to feeling like an outsider. He had heard stories about this part of town, how the people here often looked down on people like him. But Jaden wasn't the type to care much. He just wanted to get to the park and enjoy his afternoon far away from the noise of the city. As he skated down the sidewalk, he could feel the cool breeze brush against his face. He loved moments like this. The sound of his wheels on the pavement was comforting, almost like a rhythm he could trust. His mind was clear, and for once, he wasn't thinking about the struggles that followed him wherever he went. Today, he was just a boy on his skateboard, enjoying the simple freedom of movement. But as he passed a tall white house with perfectly trimmed hedges, something caught his eye. There was a woman standing in front of the house, her arms crossed tightly. Her eyes were locked on him, and she had an expression on her face that Jaden couldn't quite read, but he didn't like it. Her name was Karen, and she was exactly the type of person who made him feel uneasy. She was dressed in a crisp white blouse and expensive-looking slacks, standing with an air of superiority. Her eyes narrowed as Jaden skated past her, her gaze following him sharply. It didn't take long for Jaden to sense something wasn't right. He tried to ignore her and kept moving forward, but then he heard her voice, low but loud enough for him to hear. Another one of them, she muttered under her breath, barely audible but clearly meant for him to hear. Jaden's heart sank a little. He had heard comments like that before, but it never got easier. He didn't want to turn around and confront her, but something about the way she said it made him feel uncomfortable. He tried to shake it off, focusing on the road ahead. But Karen wasn't done. She stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply against the sidewalk as she took a few steps toward him. She didn't like the look of this boy. Something about him felt out of place in her pristine, perfect neighborhood. "Hey, stop right there," she called, her voice loud now, filled with authority. Jaden hesitated but then stopped. He turned to look at her, wondering why she was calling him out. He didn't know her, and she didn't know him. Why was she making such a fuss? "What are you doing here?" Karen demanded, her eyes scanning him as if she was inspecting a piece of dirt on her shoe. Jaden's mind raced. "I'm just skating to the park," he explained, trying to keep his voice calm and steady. "I'm not causing any trouble." But Karen wasn't convinced. Her eyes narrowed further as she looked at him suspiciously, her fingers curling tightly around the phone in her hand. Her gaze lingered on him, and she could feel a sense of unease rising within her. "You shouldn't be here," she muttered, almost to herself. "This is a safe neighborhood. We don't need people like you." Jaden felt a pang in his chest. The words stung, but he knew better than to react. He had been in situations like this before. People like Karen often judged him based on his appearance, his skin color, his clothes, the way he spoke. It didn't matter that he wasn't causing any harm. To her, he was just another threat. Without warning, Karen pulled out her phone and dialed 911. Jaden watched in confusion as she raised the phone to her ear, her expression growing more serious. "Yes, hello. I need to report a suspicious person in my neighborhood," Karen said into the phone, her voice tinged with fear. "There's a young black boy skating around here, and I don't feel safe. He's acting strangely. I think he's up to no good." Jaden's heart skipped a beat. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. He wasn't doing anything wrong. He was just skating, something he did every day. And yet here she was, calling the police on him as if he were a criminal. Karen continued to speak on the phone, her voice growing louder with each passing second. Yes, please send someone right away. I don't know what he's up to, but I don't trust him. He doesn't belong here. Jaden stood there, frozen, as the words sank in. He couldn't believe it. Was this really happening? Was he really being judged and treated like a criminal just because of the way he looked? He wanted to speak up, to defend himself, but the words stuck in his throat. What could he say? What could he do? As the minutes passed, the tension in the air grew thicker. Jaden could hear sirens in the distance, getting closer. He didn't know what to expect next, but he had a bad feeling in his stomach. And that's when he realized this was no longer just about him and his skateboard. This was about something much bigger. It was about the way people saw him, the way he was judged before he even had a chance to speak. Jaden stood there, his heart racing as the two officers stepped closer to him. The sound of his own breath felt loud in his ears, drowning out the distant chirping of the birds and the rustling of the trees. He wanted to speak, to say something that would make the officers see the truth, but his voice caught in his throat. The taller officer looked down at him with a cold expression, his gaze unwavering. "What's your name, kid?" he asked, his voice stern. Jaden hesitated for a moment before answering, his eyes flicking nervously from the officer to Karen, who was still watching from the yard. Jaden Carter," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. The officer nodded, taking a step back as he pulled out a notepad. "Jaden Carter," he repeated, jotting something down on the page. "And what are you doing in this neighborhood?" Jaden's mind raced, struggling to come up with the right words. He didn't want to get into a confrontation with the police. He just wanted to go to the park and forget about everything. But now, it seemed like that was impossible. Karen had already made up her mind about him, and the officers were only following her lead. "I was just skating," Jaden said again, his voice shaking slightly. "I wasn't bothering anyone. I'm just trying to get to the park." But the officer didn't seem convinced. "You're not supposed to be here," he muttered under his breath, looking over his shoulder at Karen for confirmation. "This area is private. You should know better than to just skate around." Jaden's stomach churned. He knew that wasn't true. There was no sign that said you couldn't skate here. And yet, the officer was acting as if he had done something wrong. "I didn't know," he said, his voice barely audible. "I didn't mean any harm." The taller officer looked at him, his eyes softening just a little. "Yeah, well, it doesn't matter now. We have to check you out, make sure you're not causing any trouble." Jaden swallowed hard, his hands trembling as he stuffed them into his hoodie pockets. He felt trapped, cornered, with nowhere to run. He glanced at Karen one more time, and she stared back at him with a cold, calculating look, as if she had won. The worst part, Jaden knew she was probably right. In her eyes, he didn't belong here, and that was all that mattered. Just as the officers were about to start asking him more questions, another car pulled up behind them. Jaden didn't see who was in it, but he heard the door open and the sound of heels clicking against the sidewalk. It was a woman's voice that broke the silence next, calm but authoritative. "What's going on here?" the woman asked, her voice cutting through the tension in the air. The officers turned around, their faces lighting up with recognition as the woman walked toward them. Jaden couldn't see her face yet, but the way the officers reacted told him this was someone important. "Ma'am, this kid was acting suspicious in the neighborhood," the taller officer explained, still eyeing Jaden with a mix of uncertainty and suspicion. "Suspicious? He's a child, for heaven's sake." The woman's voice rose slightly, filled with disbelief. She looked at Jaden, her eyes scanning him carefully, before turning back to the officers. "Is this really necessary?" Jaden's heart skipped a beat. Something in the woman's voice felt different from the others. It wasn't condescending, like Karen's. It was firm but not judgmental. She wasn't here to judge him based on his appearance. One of the officers shrugged, clearly uncomfortable. "We were just following up on a 911 call, ma'am." A woman in the neighborhood was concerned about him. The woman's expression changed to one of concern. She looked over at Karen, who had been watching from the sidelines, her arms still crossed, her eyes cold. The woman stepped closer to Karen, her voice low but clear. "Ma'am, did you really call the police on this boy for skating in the neighborhood?" Karen didn't even flinch. "Yes, I did. I told you, he's up to no good. He's just here to cause trouble. You can't trust kids like him." The woman's face hardened, her eyes narrowing at Karen's words. "What exactly do you mean by that?" Karen's voice grew more defensive. "He doesn't belong here. He's just out of place, and I don't feel safe with him around." The woman's gaze never left Karen, her silence heavy with unspoken thoughts. After a long pause, she spoke again, her voice steady but filled with an unmistakable firmness. "I'll be the judge of who belongs here and who doesn't. I suggest you mind your own business, ma'am." Karen stepped back, taken aback by the woman's authority. She opened her mouth to protest, but no words came out. The woman turned back to Jaden, her gaze softening as she spoke directly to him. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice warm and kind. Jaden nodded slowly, unsure of how to respond. "I'm okay," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman smiled, giving him a reassuring look. "Good. You're free to go. These officers will clear everything up." Jaden felt a strange sense of relief wash over him as the tension in the air seemed to dissipate. He looked at the officers one last time, and this time there was no coldness in their eyes, only the realization that they had made a mistake. As Jaden walked away from the officers, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The tension was still thick in the air, and even though the officers had backed down, Karen stood there, glaring at him from her yard. It wasn't over. He could feel it. The woman, who had come to his defense, stood by the officers, speaking to them in low tones. Jaden didn't hear their conversation, but he could tell by their body language that something had shifted. The officers were no longer so sure of themselves, their rigid stances now relaxed. Jaden took a few more steps toward the park, feeling a sense of relief in his chest. At least for now, it seemed like he was safe. But the unsettling thought lingered. Karen had gotten away with it. She painted him as a threat, and even though the woman had helped, he knew the damage had been done. It felt like no matter what he did, no matter how innocent he was, people would always judge him by the color of his skin. The sound of footsteps behind him made him turn. The woman who had stepped in was walking toward him, her pace quick and purposeful. "Hey, kid," she called out softly, a gentle smile on her face. Jaden stopped and turned around, surprised. Yeah?" he asked cautiously, unsure of what to expect. The woman's smile remained, but there was something about her expression that told him she was no stranger to tough situations. "I just wanted to apologize for what happened back there," she said, her voice calm but filled with sincerity. "You didn't deserve any of that." Jaden blinked, taken aback. "It's okay. I mean, I didn't really do anything." The woman nodded, looking down at him. "I know, but sometimes people don't see things the way they should." She paused for a moment, clearly thinking carefully about her next words. "That woman, Karen, she's been here for a while. People like her, they create problems for others without even realizing it. And it's never fair." Jaden frowned, not understanding completely. "What do you mean? Who is she, really?" The woman's expression hardened just a little, her voice lowering. "Karen is someone who thinks she can control things, especially when it comes to people who don't look like her. But she doesn't have that power, not in this neighborhood, not in this country." Jaden stood silently for a moment, letting her words sink in. It felt like a small piece of the puzzle was finally falling into place, but there was still so much more to understand. "But why did she call the police on me? I was just skating." The woman's gaze softened, and she placed a hand on Jaden's shoulder, looking him in the eye. "Because people like Karen see anyone who doesn't fit their image of normal as a threat. You didn't do anything wrong, Jaden. She's the one who created the problem, not you." Jaden felt a lump form in his throat. It wasn't fair. It wasn't right. But before he could respond, the woman continued, her tone shifting slightly. Listen, I don't think you know who I am, but I think you should. My name is Valerie Simmons. Jaden looked at her in confusion. Valerie Simmons. Wait, I've heard that name before. Valerie smiled faintly, but there was a certain gravity to her expression now. I'm the state governor's wife. Jaden's eyes widened. Wait, you're the governor's wife? Valerie nodded. Yes, and I'm also someone who cares about justice. What happened today wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was part of a bigger problem that happens too often, and I won't stand for it. Jaden's mind was spinning. The woman who had stepped in to stop the officers wasn't just some random person. She was the First Lady of the state. That explained the authority she had commanded earlier. But it also made him realize how much influence she could have. And if she cared about justice, maybe this wasn't the end of it. Valerie took a deep breath, her eyes narrowing as she looked back toward Karen's house. I'm not done with her. I'll make sure the right people know about what happened here. No one should feel unsafe in their own neighborhood because of someone's prejudices. Jaden felt a surge of hope at her words. For the first time since the incident began, he felt like someone truly understood him. Valerie didn't see him as a problem. She saw him as a person. Thank you, Ms. Simmons, he said softly, feeling both grateful and humbled. Valerie smiled again, her expression softening. You're welcome, Jaden. Just remember, you matter. And there are people who will fight for you. She turned to leave, but before she did, she looked back at him one last time. Stay strong, and don't let people like Karen ever make you feel like you're not enough. You are. Jaden watched her walk away, her confident stride leaving him with a sense of peace he hadn't had all day. As he stood there, he realized that something had shifted in him. Today had been a turning point. It wasn't just about the injustice he had faced. It was about the people who would stand up to make sure it didn't happen again. The following days were a blur for Jaden. What had started as a simple afternoon of skating in the neighborhood had quickly turned into something far bigger than he could have ever imagined. The incident with Karen and the police officers was no longer just a local problem. It had become the talk of the town. News outlets began covering the story, and Jaden's face was everywhere. Headlines read, Black boy arrested for skating in upscale neighborhood. State governor's wife steps in. People from all walks of life were sharing their opinions on what had happened. Some supported Jaden, while others criticized Karen's actions. For the first time, Jaden realized that this was bigger than just him. The prejudice and racism that had been directed at him weren't isolated events. They were part of a larger system that affected countless others. But today, people were starting to listen. Jaden sat quietly in his living room, staring at the TV screen. His mom had come home early that day, and they watched together as the news anchors discussed the incident. Jaden's heart skipped a beat when they showed an interview with Valerie Simmons, the woman who had helped him. I will not stand by and let injustice happen in my own backyard, Valerie said confidently, her voice unwavering. No child should ever feel threatened because of the color of their skin, and no one should be judged based on their appearance. This needs to change. Jaden smiled faintly, feeling a sense of relief. It was clear that Valerie wasn't just offering empty words. She was backing them up with actions. He remembered how she had stood up to Karen, how she had made it clear that the real issue was Karen's blatant prejudice. But even with that comfort, Jaden couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that lingered in his chest. He thought about Karen and what she must be feeling now. He knew that she had been wrong, but he couldn't help but wonder, what would happen to her? It wasn't long before the answer came. The next morning, Jaden's mom woke him up with a strange look on her face. You need to see this, she said, handing him her phone. On the screen was an article from a local news site. Karen has been fired. Her employer responds to controversy. Jaden's eyes widened as he read through the article. Apparently, after the incident, the story had caught the attention of Karen's employer, a high-end real estate firm. They had conducted an internal review of her actions, and after several complaints about her behavior, they had decided to let her go. Jaden felt a wave of mixed emotions. Part of him was glad that Karen's actions had consequences, but another part of him felt uneasy. It wasn't that he wanted to ruin her life. He just wanted her to understand the harm she had caused. His mom, sensing his hesitation, spoke softly. She made a choice, Jaden, and that choice had consequences. People like her need to learn that actions have real impacts. Jaden nodded, though he still couldn't help but wonder if there was more to the story. Was Karen truly sorry for what she'd done, or was she just upset that things had backfired on her? That evening, as Jaden sat down for dinner, there was a knock at the door. His mom got up to answer it, and to Jaden's surprise, it was Valerie Simmons standing on the doorstep. "Can I come in?" Valerie asked with a warm smile. Jaden's mom stepped aside to let her in, and they all sat down at the kitchen table. Valerie looked at Jaden, her expression soft but serious. "I just wanted to check in with you," Valerie said, her tone kind. "I know things have been crazy, and I wanted to make sure you're doing okay." Jaden looked at her, his heart swelling with gratitude. He didn't know how to express how much it meant to him that someone, especially someone in such a powerful position, cared enough to ask. I'm okay," he said, his voice quiet but sincere. "It's just a lot to take in." Valerie nodded. "I understand. It's a lot for anyone, especially for someone your age. But I want you to know something. You did nothing wrong. You stood up for yourself, and that's what matters. And the fact that you're here, talking to me, shows that you're stronger than you think." Jaden looked down at his hands, the words sinking deep into his heart. He had always felt like he had to fight for everything: his space, his voice, his right to exist without judgment. But Valerie's words made him feel seen, like he wasn't alone in this fight. "Thank you," Jaden said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't helped me. I don't think anyone would have believed me." Valerie smiled, her eyes warm and kind. "You're welcome, Jaden. And you're not alone. There are people out there fighting for you, people who care about what happens to you. Just remember, no matter what anyone tells you, you matter. You always have." Jaden felt a tear slip down his cheek, and he quickly wiped it away, embarrassed. But Valerie didn't say anything. She just sat there, offering him the comfort he didn't know he needed. As she left later that evening, Jaden felt like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Things weren't perfect. The world still had a long way to go. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was part of something bigger, something that could make a real difference. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. He wasn't going to let the hate and prejudice of others define him. He was ready to stand tall and keep moving forward, no matter what came next. The days following the news of Karen's firing were a whirlwind. People from all sides of the community weighed in. Some applauded the decision, calling it a step in the right direction for accountability, while others criticized it, claiming it was an overreaction. Jaden couldn't escape the constant chatter. Whether at school, in the neighborhood, or even in his own home, it seemed like the story was everywhere. It was overwhelming. He just wanted to go back to a life where he didn't have to think about what others thought of him. But that wasn't possible anymore. The reality of the situation started to set in. This wasn't just about Karen anymore. It was about something much bigger. Jaden wasn't the first person to experience prejudice in this community, and he sure wouldn't be the last. But now, his story had sparked a conversation. People were talking, and that made him wonder, could things really change? It wasn't long before the pressure of the situation began to take its toll. Every time he stepped outside, Jaden felt like eyes were on him. Some people were kind, offering smiles or nods of support, but others gave him strange looks. He couldn't shake the feeling that people saw him differently now. He wasn't just Jaden anymore. He was the boy at the center of the controversy. One afternoon, as he was walking home from school, He noticed a familiar face across the street. It was Karen, standing in her yard, her arms folded tightly across her chest. Her expression was unreadable, a mix of frustration and something else. Regret, maybe. For a moment, their eyes met. Jaden's heart skipped a beat, but he didn't look away. Karen seemed to hesitate, like she wanted to say something but didn't know how. Jaden took a deep breath and crossed the street, his steps deliberate. He wasn't sure what he was going to say, but he knew he had to say something. The silence between them had gone on long enough. "What do you want?" Jaden asked, his voice steady but guarded. Karen looked down at the ground, avoiding his gaze. I don't know," she muttered, her voice softer than he expected. "I messed up. I know that now." Jaden stood there, unsure of how to respond. He had never seen Karen like this. Vulnerable, almost apologetic. But still, the sting of everything that had happened wasn't gone. It was hard to just forgive someone who had tried to make him feel like he didn't belong in his own neighborhood. "You really hurt me," Jaden said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. "You made it feel like I was the problem, like I wasn't even supposed to be here." Karen flinched, and for a moment, Jaden thought she might say something defensive. But instead, she looked up at him, her eyes filled with guilt. "I know. I'm so sorry. I let my fear get the best of me. I thought I was protecting my neighborhood, but I see now that I was wrong. I judged you when I had no right to." Jaden didn't know how to respond. This wasn't the Karen he had known. This was someone who seemed genuinely sorry for what had happened. But could he believe it? Could he really forgive her after everything? Before he could answer, Karen spoke again, her voice breaking. "I never meant to hurt anyone. I didn't know what else to do. I let my anger take over, and now look at what it's done. I've lost my job, my reputation, everything." Jaden felt a pang of sympathy, but it didn't erase the pain he had felt. "Maybe you need to learn from this too," he said, his tone softer now. "Maybe you can help make things right. People need to understand that their actions have consequences." Karen nodded, her face a mixture of shame and remorse. "I'll do whatever it takes. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, Jaden. But I want to try and fix the damage I've caused, starting with myself." Jaden studied her for a long moment. It was clear that Karen had learned something, but he wasn't sure if she had truly changed. Only time would tell. "We'll see," Jaden finally said, his voice calm but resolute. "But actions speak louder than words." Karen nodded again, her eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and sorrow. "I understand. Thank you for even talking to me." As Jaden walked away, he couldn't help but feel a small shift inside him. It wasn't about forgiveness right now. It was about moving forward, about recognizing that change could come, even from the most unexpected places. But as he looked over his shoulder, he saw Karen standing there, her shoulders slumped in defeat, staring at the ground. Jaden didn't know what her future would hold, but for now, he knew one thing for certain. Her story was far from over. And as for his, he was just getting started. The weeks that followed were filled with change for both Jaden and Karen. The tension in the community remained, but the conversation had shifted. People were talking about race, prejudice, and accountability more openly than ever before. It was uncomfortable for some, but necessary for others. For Jaden, this wasn't just about what had happened, it was about what would happen next. Karen had spent the following days working hard to rebuild her reputation. She volunteered at local schools, speaking out about her mistakes and the lessons she had learned. She even started to attend meetings about community outreach, trying to make up for the harm she had caused. But even with her efforts, Jaden knew that change didn't happen overnight. Trust had to be earned, not given freely. One afternoon, as Jaden was walking home from school, he saw a familiar face waiting by the sidewalk. It was Valerie Simmons, the woman who had helped him when no one else had. She smiled warmly as she saw him approach. "Hey, Jaden, how are you doing?" Valerie asked, her voice kind and reassuring. Jaden shrugged, trying to act casual. "I'm okay, I guess. Still figuring it all out." Valerie nodded, understanding the weight of his words. "It's a lot to carry for someone your age, but I'm proud of how you've handled everything." Jaden smiled faintly. "I couldn't have done it without you, Valerie. You really made me feel like someone cared." Valerie's eyes softened. "You're stronger than you think, Jaden. You stood up for yourself when it wasn't easy, and you made a difference, even if you don't see it yet." Jaden paused, reflecting on her words. She was right. He had made a difference. The incident with Karen had sparked a conversation, a change in perspective that was rippling through the community. And maybe, just maybe, things would start to get better for him and for everyone who had felt the sting of prejudice. That evening, Jaden and his mom sat together at the dinner table, the air thick with quiet anticipation. She had been watching the news as well, and there had been a lot of talk about the changes happening in their town. Some people were hopeful, while others were still resistant, but Jaden knew that he had done his part. He had stood up for himself and for others, and in doing so, he had helped push the community toward a better future. "Mom, I think I understand now," Jaden said quietly, looking up at her with a new sense of clarity. "It's not just about one person changing. It's about all of us. We need to listen to each other, and we need to stand up for what's right, no matter how hard it is." His mom smiled, her eyes filled with pride. "You've got it, Jaden. Change starts with people like you. You've shown the world that standing up for what's right matters, and that's something to be proud of." Later that night, as Jaden lay in bed, he thought about everything that had happened. The fear, the anger, the uncertainty, it had all led him here, to a place where he was beginning to understand the power of his voice. His journey wasn't over, but it was just the beginning. The next day, as Jaden was walking to school, he saw Karen once again. But this time, she wasn't standing alone in her yard. This time, she was talking to a group of community members, actively participating in a conversation about how to build a more inclusive and understanding neighborhood. Jaden didn't feel angry or resentful anymore. He realized that Karen's journey wasn't his responsibility. She had her own path to walk, and he had his. He had already done what he could. He had made his stand. As he passed by, Karen looked up and caught his eye. For a brief moment, their gazes met, and Jaden saw something he hadn't expected: a genuine sense of remorse and a desire to make amends. Without saying anything, Jaden gave her a small nod. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was an acknowledgement of the fact that they were both part of the same community, learning and growing together. And as Jaden walked on, he felt lighter, as if the weight of the past had finally started to lift. There would still be challenges ahead. The road to true change was long and difficult, and it would take time. But Jaden knew one thing for sure: he was no longer afraid to face it. He had found his voice, and now he was ready to help others find theirs, too.